You're listening to Deliberate Living,
the podcast that inspires, empowers, and encourages listeners to live life more authentically.
My name is Holly Priestley, and I'm a nomad, coach, creator, and outdoorswoman.
And I'm Beers, a vagabond, joy artist, permissionary, and storybreaker.
We explore different ways people choose to ditch the prescribed life we've all been sold and live on their terms,
finding freedom and happiness however they choose.
Hello, and welcome to another episode of the Deliberate Living podcast. I am your host, Holly, and the intro for this show is a little bit different than what we normally do because the show is a little bit different than what we normally do. On the day of this recording, Beers and I were having a discussion about the podcast and just about like life in general and work and creativity and time and energy and all of these things. And we weren't intending on recording this conversation or recording this episode, but as we continued talking, we kind of just decided that it was an important enough topic that we feel what I'm sure is obviously passionate about. So we just decided to hit record and kind of launch into it. So it might sound like we're kind of in the middle of a conversation, and that's because we are. We do try to bring it back around and kind of explain where this topic got started from. And so, like I said, it's a little bit different than what we normally record. The flow is a little different, and the topic is a little different. But we feel passionately about it, and we do think that we have an opportunity to make a difference in the world and a difference in people's deliberate lifestyles. So that's what you're getting this time around. I hope that it's valuable to you. And if so, please stick around to the very end where we tell you how you can help us actually make a difference here and what you would like to see in the difference that we try to make. So without further ado, here is this week's episode. Should we do like an actual intro or just rant and
Let's just talk.
So the other day I had this self-therapy session with my journal and with my thoughts and with my very calm Spotify playlist. I had been scrolling Instagram and I saw a woman that I adore and admire and have adored and admired for 20 years. She's fucking incredible. Just someone who I really, really look up to and trust. And she had posted a screenshot of another woman I adore and have adored for slightly less long. It's just a little bit newer in my mind, but she posted a screenshot of this woman's text basically saying like how we all need to like expect less of ourselves right now, right? Like we're in a pandemic and like it's unprecedented times because millennials live in unprecedented times. Our generation is unprecedented. How lucky for us. But that it's like okay for us to like take a step back and like rest and relax and focus on ourselves and focus on our families and yada, yada, yada. Both of these women happen to be mothers, although I don't think that that's the important part of the story. And you know, how that's really important. And then the woman who posted it commented basically the same thing. Like, I totally agree. And to be honest, like the pandemic has actually been really good for me personally. Like on the one hand, it's driven me nuts because I can't get out there and like perform and like meet my audience and like make music and stuff like that in the ways I used to. But I am much more mentally and physically healthy. I'm taking care of my son, like doing all these things. And on the one hand, I fully agree with these ladies. Like I have no qualms about what they said. I do not disagree. I do think that the American like work hard, hustle, grind, like always be productive, always be monetizing, always be whatevering, you know, producing. I do think that that is like toxic and bad and like we shouldn't do it. I do believe that we all need more rest, more time for ourselves, more focus on our own mental and physical health and the health of our families. I don't have a problem with that at all. Where it got stuck for me was that the idea of taking a break, the idea of resting and like taking a step back and saying no to things feels like such a fucking privilege. Like, I don't feel like I can take a break. I have to keep working. I have to keep pitching. I have to keep hustling, because if I don't, I can't buy dog food, right? Like, I can't put food in my cooler. I have to keep working. And like, I know that I'm not the only person who is like that, right? Like, I have built a lifestyle around things that I value, right? And like, money is not my top priority, but unfortunately it is part of a capitalist society. And like, my bills are very low in comparison to a lot of human beings out there, especially a lot of Americans who actually have to pay rent, which is more than a mortgage, but they can't afford a mortgage because they don't make any money, and our system is fucked. That's an aside. But it just felt like, for so many people, this concept of like, oh yeah, we shouldn't be expecting as much from ourselves during the pandemic. Like, no, we shouldn't be. But also, like, there's so many people who have to keep going to work, even though they know they have COVID. But if they don't go to work, their bills aren't going to get paid and their kids are not going to eat, right? Like, I have people in my life who work in office environments, knew they had COVID, still went to work because they had to. Because if they didn't go to work, they wouldn't get paid, their kids wouldn't eat. And that is a fucking problem. And so then I had to like really distill all of these feelings and like go down two different directions with it, right? Like, yes, okay, resting is a privilege. Being able to take a step back and like focus on yourself in times like these is a privilege. It shouldn't be. It absolutely should not be. All humans, I believe, have a right to their mental and physical health. All humans have a right to rest and ease and hobbies that don't make them money and like time with their families. And our society is so fucked up that that is not just like a given. It is not built into anything that we do, right? And then I had to go down like the like woo-woo law of attraction side, where I was like, okay, but it's a privilege in our society, but it's a privilege that I want. So how do I get it? How do I get it? How do I, Holly, get more of this like privilege of rest and ease and like being able to take my foot off the gas, right? And it's kind of like an acting as if, right? Law of attraction is kind of that like manifesting, like channel the energy that you want to have more of in your life. Okay, so what would it feel like to be abundant enough to be able to say no, to have the ability to rest, to only work on projects that I'm really passionate about, and like still make enough money to make ends meet in an abundant way, right? Like, I want $1 million. Sure, who doesn't want $1 million? I want $1 million so that I can go to the farmer's market in any town that I'm in and buy something from every vendor there. That's what I want. I want $1 million so that I can support all of my friends' Patreon pages. I want $1 million so that I can buy art from every street artist that I find and give money to every busker and every live musician. Like, that's what I want it for. I just want to share the wealth. That's what I want. And instead, I'm like stressed out about like, oh, I should take that really low paying gig for that client that I know I hate working with because I have bills to pay, because I have dogs to feed. And so it was just like this really interesting like therapy session with myself. I wrote like 3 pages front and back in my like school size journal. And then I was like, okay, well, that's all I have now, but I'm still not over it. Like, I still need to think about it and talk about it and like evidently rant about it on my podcast. Like, I still need to like process it. And it just feels like so much sometimes. And so I'm really curious how other people feel. Does anybody else feel like rest is a privilege that shouldn't be? Like, should it be a God-given right, a government-given right? Just as like healthcare and like maybe universal basic income? I don't fucking know. I don't know.
I was about to say, that's what universal basic income would allow, which would then foster more creative output and et cetera, et cetera, et cetera.
Thanks for listening to my rant.
I love you.
Thank you, Beers. I love you too. I don't think anybody has gotten to like see that or hear that like version of me. Like I get fired up, I got my soapboxes, whatever, but usually people get it from like Instagram, right? Like it's a totally different experience, and like you're not necessarily sitting in my van with me and my dogs, like you're still via Zoom, and you know our audience is listening to this or watching this however they are, but like damn, I feel a little released, but also still fired up, definitely fiery.
So yeah, like I do, like I think our society, I think it should be a right. I think that at least in some form or fashion, like there's a lot about our society that is really fucked up, that incentivizes a lot of really toxic things and discourages a lot of really necessary healthy things. And I mean, there's so many ideas out there of ways that society could be restructured to allow for all of these things to be more aligned. And also, with any type of change, there's always resistance, and there's big resistance, and there's so many ideas, and so very little changes very quickly. And and you know, an idea that's been churning through my head as you've been talking about this is, I don't really know how this would work, but it would be really, really beautiful to create like a mutual aid rest scholarship of like those who can contribute to this mutual aid fund, and there be some sort of process, like that could get really messy really easily, but some sort of process of like, all right,
like a scholarship kind of deal.
Like what would it take to have your expenses covered for 2 weeks so you could take a breather and rest and not feel that need to grind to output and yeah, and then from that mutual aid fund be able to, those who do have that privilege, to be able to spread that and help allow others to get to enjoy that.
Yeah, I think that would be incredible. And much more what's the word, like much more preemptive than like what GoFundMe has turned into, right? Like GoFundMe was not supposed to be everybody's health insurance plan, but it has become that way.
Yeah.
Because, you know, the American system is failing us. But I think this would be like a really good, like preventive care type measure for people to take care of each other. And like, yeah, like, do you need to cover your bills, your grocery bills for like this week? Awesome. Tell us what you need and like your situation and whatever. And like, we give you the money. I think that would be such a cool way of like people coming together and like building community and taking care of each other. And like, that's what community is. Like, that's how we have all survived, you know, for thousands of years before we got into our modern situation where we're all together but separate. And like, you know, the American system is very independent, right? Like, I'm going to take care of myself, that I'm going to pull myself up by my bootstraps. And if you work hard, then like you'll suddenly like get a bunch of money. And like, if you just keep at it and you keep working hard, and like, that's another like super toxic societal norm that we have. And it's so, I don't know if it's like specifically generational. I don't think it's specifically generational, but I think we are in a generation that is like on the fulcrum of change. And I think our parents were definitely part of this, like, go to college, get a degree, work really hard, and you'll be rewarded type generation, right? And I think the generations after us see the bullshit and the fallacy in that, and they're doing their own thing. And I think our generation, I think the millennials in the middle here are kind of like, oh my God, I've been raised with this toxic bullshit of working hard and being rewarded, and I know it's fake, but I don't have the freedom that Gen Z has to like pursue something else. So I gotta like, I want to live this way, but I have to live by these rules. And like, it's just such a fucking clusterfuck. Like, this is going to be one of our most swearingest episodes.
Yeah, I was actually thinking about like the YouTube monetization stuff and how we might need to adjust that, and maybe this one won't qualify for YouTube monetization.
That's fine. I'd rather
not that there's much or any money that comes from the monetization of it, but yeah.
No, and yeah, it's sorry for all the YouTube ads, you guys, but like, we're trying. We are trying.
So before I hit record on this delightful conversation that Holly and I were in the middle of when y'all tuned in, we talked a little bit about just the toxic story, the not true story that Holly was talking about. She had mentioned how we're told that there's supposed to be this correlation between hard work and money, and that if you put in the hard work, then you're going to get rewarded with the money. And like you were saying, like there probably is some generational aspect to that. Maybe that was to more of a degree than it is now. Maybe that was at one point a little bit more of a true story, or at least a reflection of their experience and reality. But today's world, like that frankly, that capitalist mentality just isn't a true story that reflects the majority of people's experience. It's so much of making good money comes from some combination of just having the right skill set at the right time in the right place. It's those circumstances, and we acknowledge that, yeah, maybe there is some sense in which if you're always hustling, if you're always trying this and that maybe that increases the chances of being in the right place, the right time with the right thing. But
also it can be bullshit, right? Like, anybody out there who's ever tried to make something, whether that be a business or a product or art or music or whatever, anybody out there who's ever tried to make something and who's felt really passionate about it, pours their heart and soul into whatever their project is, sees somebody else online usually doing it worse than them and making more money than them. And that is just so frustrating and mind-boggling. Like, man, like, there's somebody out there who's half as good as you, making twice as much as you, just because either they believed in themselves more, or they had different circumstances and like different chances and different connections, right? Like, nepotism is a real thing. Like, who you know fucking matters, but that doesn't mean that you shouldn't put yourself out there, right? Like, don't lay down and die and just be a doormat on capitalist soil, right? But especially in like the entrepreneurial world, as Beers and I were well, as I was previously ranting and he was listening very politely, in the entrepreneurial world, like it's very much like constant hustle and grind, and like, you know, you wear your busyness and your tiredness with pride, right? And I was a part of that society for like 10 years before I moved into the van, and like the last 3 years in the van have been so interesting because I've gotten to kind of detach from that, like literally drive away from that environment, and then drive into this environment of vanners who are generally a little bit more laid back, a little bit more focused on like living life and enjoying life and all these other things. So I've gotten to see some very different views of the world and how you should spend your time and your energy and your days. I still fall prey to the, well, I just have to work harder. I just have to work harder. I just have to keep at it. I just have to keep at it. And there's definitely this like, you know,
there's so much reinforcement of that story all the time. It's
all the
hard
time.
to break out of it.
It's hard to break out of it, but like working hard for what you want, yes, matters. Do it. Awesome. I always preach like do the thing that you want to do because you want to do it, and if it brings you money, awesome. And if it doesn't bring you money, also awesome. Like just do it because you want to do it. But eventually, like something's got to give, right? And either and like the hustle culture would have you believe you just keep giving, give, work, network your ass off, be everywhere all the time, constantly be producing, constantly be like making more and more and more stuff. And eventually you'll catch your big break. Someone will notice you, you will go viral, a big store will pick up your product, whatever the fuck it is. Like, it doesn't matter, whatever your industry is. Like, just keep going, don't change, have the grit. And then also the definition of crazy is doing the same thing over and over again and expecting different results. So like, how do you know which one you're doing? How do you know if you're being crazy and just hitting your head against the wall and you're never going to get anywhere and you actually need to pivot? Like, or should you just keep on keeping on because like the sprouts are right there, they're coming. And like, there's no way to know except to like get through that time period and look back, because hindsight's 2020. So in the moment, you have to figure out through your own like decision-making process, trust your gut, or give it one more chance, or try to pivot in this direction. And I am the queen of pivoting, but I'm also really good at grit. And sometimes those two can be at odds with each other. And it can be really frustrating to see other people out there doing things that I think are poorer quality and still getting like the results that I want. And then like the whole like spiritual side of my brain will be like, well, this is obviously all your fault because you are just not believing in the right things, and like you are not putting out the right energy into the world. And so this is all your fault that you're not getting this. Like you need to keep fixing and adjusting and healing yourself and working on your own mental blocks and yada, yada, yada. And like, I love my spiritual.
That's a really toxic lens of that,
right?
That spiritual story.
Right? Isn't that interesting? It's so weird. I can see that you're having a lot of thoughts, and I really want to know what they are.
There's a lot of thoughts.
Obviously, I'm having a lot of thoughts, and this is one of the first times I feel like super free to just like, bleh, here's what I'm thinking, world.
We literally were just in the middle of this conversation, and I was like, I think we have a podcast episode here, and so I hit record
real quick.
Like there's a big part of me that really wants to like sit with you and talk through stories and really like delve in really uncomfortably into the stories that are leading to so much angst and discord, and like, and try to, yeah, like help. And I know that you already have a lot of awareness of that. There's been several things you've said in this that, like, yeah, like you're aware that these are stories, but it's hard to then break free of the power of those stories and to shift the story in a way that still is a reflection of what is. It's still using the factual elements that are there, but also not feeling captive to needing to. I mean, that's what deliberate living is not needing to fit into the box of whatever these stories are telling us is supposed to be the way it is. Or, and yeah, the story, like, and it sounds like, yeah, like that story of the hustle and grind that you said that you were in that world real deep for a long time. And like that's a really hard story to shift, because it there's so many, they just kind of like aspects of it just kind of like, I don't know, it's like these tentacles that just like wrap all around through your brain and like connect, like it creates like neural pathways of thinking. When this happens, it automatically in my mind connects it to this other thing, and which reinforces a certain story. And so I don't know, part of me would like, yeah, like story, like all that stuff around story, like that's part of my magic. It's part of what I love to really delve into. And I don't know, I've been for a little while developing a lot of stuff around that. But so part of me is like, okay, story time, story breaking time. and then like another part of me, and like that whole mutual aid thing, like I like it. I like the idea. And I'm also kind of wondering, like, I mean, any singular idea doesn't fix a system. But I'm thinking, okay, like, yeah, like if you had like a 2-week break to just like rest, like, would that, once those 2 weeks were over, would anything actually be different?
And
Or
that fully depends on the person who took the break. How did they
right,
use it?
right,
Did they use it as a, maybe the first week was just like resting and resetting and like eating and drinking and making whatever they wanted, and then the next week was like, all right, story breaking time, so that they
right,
could like reintegrate with like new tools. And I
right,
mean, that's one part of how I'm trying to live a deliberate life, is constantly like thinking through my thoughts and not believing everything I think and not believing everything I believe, and
mhm,
like investigating what beliefs even mean, right?
uh-huh,
And trying to give myself like new tools to assess different things, like all of the ability to have the rant that I had at the top of the show is the result of a lot of years of work of trying to get to this
right,
point, rather than just
right.
being frustrated that like,
Mm,
oh, this stuff isn't working, and like that's the end of the story. It's
uh-huh,
more like, oh, I'm having feelings. What are those feelings? What do they mean? Okay, this is what those mean. Interesting. Cool. What does that mean? Okay. And then I'm making new neural pathways between like all of these thoughts. And I know that there's more work there to do. Like I can feel it right here. I can feel that there's more digging to get through. And I haven't done it yet. So I guess I just need more journaling time, which is my preferred way of digging. Or talking usually at someone. Not always with, because when I get on a rant, I don't necessarily let other people jump in because I got to finish what I'm saying first. But yeah, like that, those are tools that I have, that I've been able to like build and I carry around with me in my little emotional tool case. And
Proud of you for that.
It took me a while to like get them. And there's more tools that I will continue adding to it. And that's like, I've never tried to position myself as like someone who constantly like lives a purposeful, deliberate, authentic life. Like, no, my deliberate, authentic life is fucking up and like trying again and like figuring it out and having emotions and being frustrated and taking a break and coming back to it later.
Yes.
Like I am completely like not there yet, not perfect, not an expert, not certified, not any of those things. Like I am just here doing the best I can. And I think that's like a pretty good way to be deliberate in and of itself. And like there's always going to be like more to dig out. There's always going to be more ways to like think through things. But like so much of it is an awareness of the stories that you've grown up with in your society, in your family, in your work, whatever, right? Like, well, if you just work hard, you'll make a lot of money. Like that is the air that America breathes. Like you don't get to be in America and not have that story in some way, right? Maybe your family was countercultural and they were very against it, but you still know the story. Everybody knows the story, right? It's kind of like Little Red Riding Hood. Everybody knows the story, but it means different things to different people. And depending on which region of the world you're from, like she has different elements to the story than others, but everybody knows it. Everybody in America knows the work hard equals success story in some way.
Yeah. Everybody's heard that story. It's so prevalent in the stories we consume, in our television shows, in our classrooms, in our history lessons. It's like that's the lens that our newspapers, our news shows and stories, like it's unavoidable in our society. It's so ingrained into the fabric of what makes America, of what makes the Western world, of what, and that Western world through colonialism and all sorts of stuff is kind of the dominant culture globally that puts that story in like the all over the planet.
Yeah. And we have like another piece of the story that you can tease out is that you have to like earn your worth.
Right.
Like if you want to break free of the story of having to work hard, then it's like, oh, but then how am I worth being here? Like, how do I deserve to be here if I'm not contributing in some way, if I'm not working in some way? And like, that's a completely different mindfuck that we can rant about on another episode if y'all are interested in hearing me rant more. Or maybe we can get beers on a rant, you know? Maybe we could just have like every couple of episodes, we'll just have like rant and whatever this issue is. But like, that's a whole nother thing. Like my goal, if you've been following my Instagram for a few months, my goal for 2022 was ease. I want more ease in my life. And ease is not easy. I had a conversation on actually New Year's Eve about the difference between ease and easy, and that's a whole podcast on in and of itself. But I keep running up against walls with ease because, well, this shouldn't be that easy. Or if I'm taking it easy and I'm allowing myself ease, like, do I deserve XYZ thing that I'm trying to get in that moment, right? Like, do I deserve? And like everyone is deserving of ease and of rest and of mental and physical health and like getting to take a step back and expect less from yourself during the pandemic or just during fucking life. Yeah, YouTube is not going to monetize this. I think I say fuck way too many times.
Even like that, like that concept of deserve is, that's
It's gross.
What's that?
It's icky. It's gross.
Yeah, right. It is. And it's I don't know, that could be a whole nother, well, yeah, when you're talking about like worth, like self-worth, what are we worth, what do we deserve, like that's a whole really, really sticky, icky topic that frankly is all connected in with this same story.
Yeah.
And it's
a big old tangled mess.
It is. And it's this, it's a combination of like, transactional, of like an unhealthy transactional like obsession, and an entitled, rights obsessed story. And it's like this both of these kind of playing in, and like in this tug of war that isn't, neither one of them is like the story that is that is going to be the answer to everything. It's but yeah, there's so much conflict between those, and it just gets real messy, real messy.
Yeah, and I think it's important enough to keep talking about.
Oh yeah.
Like, I would love to get in there and like tease apart all the different stories and find what's worth keeping and what's worth getting rid of, right? And it's going to be different for everybody.
Oh yeah.
Right? Like what I decide is worth keeping is going to be different than what Beers decides is worth keeping, is going to be different than what any of our audience members decide, is what worth keeping. And that's fine. And part of being deliberate is getting to make those decisions for yourself and letting other people make their own decisions for themselves.
Right. There's, I mean, coming from, for me, like from my religious background, well, all my life, like I've loved story. I've always loved story so much, and the power of story and the ramifications of story, and the lens of story, all of this. But for me, what I began, oh wow, it's been 10 years that my and coming out of the evangelical world, it's often referred to as deconstruction, and that's used elsewhere, but it's a big term in the ex-evangelical arena. And there was a podcast that I really enjoyed as I was going through my own deconstruction, which, I mean, just to be clear, it's been a 10-year process in the making. It's been 6 years since I stopped identifying myself with that evangelical Christian world that I had been in. And there are still those tentacles of those stories that I run up against very regularly, that I have to pick that apart and realize that, oh, the reason I feel that way in this scenario, the reason I am thinking this is because I bought into a story for such a long time that told me this and this and this. And but there was this podcast that I was listening to a lot during this deconstruction that I really loved for a lot of years. Like, it was going through deconstruction. It was just looking at so many different topics and so many different stories through different lenses. And then over time, like the other hosts started dropping off, and it kind of became this one host who then brought in other people who, and they're reconstructing something new, which on one hand can be really beautiful, and also, to your point right before this, is for me part of that deconstruction is realizing some of the dangers of wading too deeply into collective stories and getting caught up in, well, if I'm believing this part of this story, then that also needs to mean this and this and this and this and this, or I'm just an imposter. It's just a fake. I'm not really here. What is my identity anyhow? And I think so much of the value and the freedom of story breaking, of deconstruction, of harnessing the power of the stories that we tell ourselves is the ability to find that story, to create that story that is working well for me right now, and continually being open to holding those stories loosely, so that when that story needs to shift, when all of a sudden, oh, well, no, this isn't actually really the thing I thought it was, and being able to release that story and let it be something else entirely. And like there's some parallels there to like the pivoting of that entrepreneurial world, but it's for me, it's a practice of just trying not to feel so tied into other people's constructs of what should be, of what this story is, and just continually questioning, all right, something about this doesn't feel aligned. Why is that? What is leading me to feel this misalignment inside? And how can that story shift so that I can return to alignment?
Yeah. And it all just kind of comes down to that, like, awareness of your own thoughts.
Yes.
And like awareness of the things that you believe.
Mm-hmm.
I'm definitely using believe in air quotes there.
And the
beliefs are just thoughts that we like constantly think over and over and over again, and we don't question.
Right.
Like that's what a belief is.
What the most remarkable, I think I've probably shared this story here before, but like the most remarkable transformative aspect of the last 10 years of my life was it was right when I was starting as a nomad, just a couple months in, was fresh out of right on the beginning stages of my second divorce. I was right about to take that final step in my, not final step, but that big step in my deconstruction of no longer being connected to the church. And I was feeling a lot of angst. I was just feeling so twisted up inside, and I had identified as an addict for quite a number of years, and I had developed a lot of coping mechanisms to not indulge or not return to that compulsive behavior. And one of the big ones was listening to audiobooks, listening to podcasts, like all the time. Like if I was by myself, I was mostly listening to something if I wasn't like mentally occupied with whatever was right in front of me. And I met this woman, Jules, up in Chicago. We met just standing with our in the sand on the beach, looking at Lake Michigan, and we just talked for hours and hours and just connected really deeply. And we were talking about podcasts, sharing podcast recommendations, and then it came up in conversation a little bit later that she didn't use headphones. I was like, but wait a second, you listen to all these podcasts? And she's like, yeah, when I listen to them, I just sit and I listen. She's like, because I want to be mindful of what's going on around me. And so I don't want to like walk around with headphones in my ears. And she's like, I just want to be able to like be aware of my thoughts. And that was up to that point in my life. I was 33 years old. And like, that was a brand new concept to me. And the next day I had I think it was about a 7-hour motorcycle ride. And I didn't put on any audiobooks, didn't put on any music, didn't put on any podcasts. And I just rode and
ouch,
thought my thoughts and like watched my thoughts. And I don't know that I had done that consciously for more than 5 minutes in my entire life. And here I was jumping into 7 hours of like committing, I am just going to let my thoughts come. And oh my goddess, it was uncomfortable. I got to where I was going that night and I just put this big rant on social media just about how do you stop thinking a thought that you don't want to think. And because there were all these thoughts that I was having that like my evangelical informed stories were just telling me were not okay thoughts to have, that it was wrong to even have these thoughts. And that same friend I met, Jules, she saw my post and she called me up and she's like, no, like you embrace the dragon. You give the dragon a hug. You see what the dragon has to say, and see what it actually needs. And also like be prepared to like let go of the dragon and like comfort yourself. Like should you need to, don't burn yourself. And also like let those thoughts come, love them, accept them, embrace them, and see where they lead you. Mm-hmm. And for me, that was the beginning of an absolutely epic journey of just allowing myself to become aware of my thoughts, to really become aware of my stories, to have even greater awareness of my emotions and the way all of those interplay together. And like I don't have I mean, as we talked about, like routines aren't generally my thing that much. And I don't have like a dedicated meditation practice, so to speak, but I have become very practiced at becoming aware of how I'm feeling and letting myself and what I'm telling myself and letting myself, all right, yeah, I need to sit with this. I need to look at this. I need to let I need to see where this is going to take me, and be open to whatever it shows me about myself, whatever it shows me about what's around me, whatever it shows me about my stories. And oh, it's been so fucking rich.
Totally. Yeah, I think that, I mean, this podcast is definitely a journey. So thank you to all the listeners who are still here with us. And I think that's a good place to kind of wrap it up for now. And like, that's a lot for people to like chew on, I think. You look like you're about to say something.
Yeah. I'm going to try this. How much would you need to cover your expenses to not have to grind for 2 weeks? Do you know off the top of your head, or would you have to figure it out?
Yeah, I don't know off the top of my head.
Okay.
Yeah.
Ballpark figure?
My bills are pretty low.
Yeah. Just... I know you've created a lifestyle where your bills are pretty low. Do you have like a ballpark figure?
Probably a couple $100.
Oh, a couple $100?
Yeah. For 2 weeks? Like,
yeah.
Like, I don't know, $100 for groceries. And I just filled up the van yesterday, so like she's good for a while. That's another 100. This girl is thirsty. She needs a lot of this.
Your girl van is thirsty. Yeah.
Thirsty. And the gas stations around here like cut you off at like $74, which is never enough to fill the tank. So then you got to like go through the whole process again, which just like puts salt in the wound.
Yeah. So, I mean, wow, that's so low. Like, so first off, like, I want you to do that. I want you to take 2 weeks, and I
have assignments due in the next 2 weeks, so I will do those first.
Okay, let's schedule it. Figure out when you can, and I would like to invite the audience to submit ideas of how to try to create, like, I really like this like mutual aid to support rest idea, and so I welcome the audience to give us their suggestions on how to actually implement something like that. And also, if anybody wants to help contribute specifically for Holly to have that rest, please message us. I don't have anything set. This is not a planned thing, so I don't have anything set up for it. But let us know if you'd like to help with that. I am going to back it personally, so that you will definitely have at least 2 weeks of rest. But I also want to invite the audience to contribute to that if they are in a position to do so, and also to contribute ideas for how we might be able to try to create and grow something that can give more people that rest.
Okay, so 2 things. 1, I'm having a lot of feels. A lot of feels about that. Like it feels icky, right?
Yeah.
To ask for money feels icky.
You didn't ask for it.
I know I didn't, but it still like just feels a little bit like, oh, I could never. Like, no, don't do that. Your money is better spent somewhere else. There are people who are worse off than I am. You know, all these other stories that are coming up that minimize our own experiences, right? That's minimizing our own experiences is an episode in and of itself too. So I'm gonna process those. I'm gonna break those stories. The second, abso-fucking-lutely, let's make a mutual aid for the support of rest of anyone who needs it. So yes, anybody who knows anything about doing that, any suggestions, anybody who wants to be a part of it, yes, let's turn this journey of a podcast episode into something positive. Let's do it. I'm so excited. Yeah, this has been fun. And so, yeah, I'm really curious to hear from the audience how you feel about any of the rants that we went on. There were a few. How you feel about rest. What does rest look like? If you had a week or two where you could just focus on yourself and focus on rest, what would you do with it? And then also, like, any story breakers out there, I want to know how, like, what stories are coming up for you or have come up for you that you've worked through. And ooh, wouldn't it be fun? Okay, thing the third. Three things.
Thing the third.
Thing the third. What if we invited audience members onto the show for a story breaking session with us?
I would.
If they are coming up with some kind of like block in their own lives and some kind of story in their own lives, some kind of frustration, chronic frustration, like the kind of frustration that like you try to work on but keeps coming back. I have my own chronic frustrations. They are generally financial related, obviously based on this show. Based on today's episode, we can tell. But yeah, like I think that Beers and I would be game for this. So audience, if you would like to hear that, or if you would like to be a part of that, also send us a message and say like, you know, oh, I'd love to hear that. Or, hey, I have a chronic frustration. I would like to story break with you guys. That can also be something we do in future episodes. I think that would be so much fun.
Oh yeah. Oh yeah.
So, all right, well, you know what? This is a really unplanned episode, and I am pretty pleased with how it turned out.
So am I. This was a lot of fun, and I'm pretty excited about what may come from this.
Yeah, likewise. Awesome. Well, thank you, Beers. I'm glad that you hit record in the middle of my rant. I appreciate it. And I am grateful for everyone who has tuned in to this episode, especially if you've made it this far in it with all the F-bombs and with all the twists and turns that this episode took. But yeah, if you haven't subscribed, go ahead and subscribe. Thumbs up, 5 stars, you know the deal. I don't need to reiterate. Just help us get seen by the algorithms, and maybe send this episode to somebody you know who might be struggling with a little bit of rest, somebody who needs to break free of the hustle culture, or any other story that they might have. And yeah, give us your feedback on the ideas that we've had. And tune in next week for another excellent episode. Bye.
Bye.